Tractor's gonna live the nation, and Spectrum's got such supervision. M.A.S.K is a mighty power that could save the day. M.A.S.K, no one knows what lies behind the mask charade. M.A.S.K, always riding out on Venom's trail. Comes to the laser rays, fire away.
Hi everyone, this is David from the Boulder Hill Archive coming at you. Today we're going to be talking about some M.A.S.K comics. So in our last few parts we've talked about the M.A.S.K mini comics, we've talked about the preview comics, and we've also gone through the 4-part DC miniseries. We're going to round out our look at the DC comics in the US comics with the 9-issue regular series. So these issues were, I'll have them up on screen here, published between February of 1987 and October 87 is the dates they are listed on the covers. So this would have been probably M.A.S.K's heyday. This would have been moving in towards when they would have been doing the racing series. These issues were DC's attempt at an ongoing. So by 1987, M.A.S.K had already been around for 2 years. It was pretty widely established. The cartoon was popular. And as a kid, I didn't know about these books. I've told the story that I found them at a local discount store in a bargain bin. So I picked up a few of these issues there. I picked up one of every issue they had, brought them home, and then I started piecing together my collection from there, from local comic book shops and whatnot over the years. So where do we start with these books? Looking at the covers, the artwork on these is beautiful. I've always liked the artwork. Some of the coloring is a bit off, which was very typical of the time period. If you look at the G.I. Joe and Transformer comics from Marvel at the time, there could be some pretty wacky coloring issues. Particularly on Transformers, there's characters that just were really weirdly colored. So that's something you just have to accept when you're reading older comic books. The coloring isn't quite what would be in a modern comic book today. But the artwork was done by Curt Swan for a lot of it, who was a very prominent DC comic book artist. He worked on Superman for a while, kind of defined Superman for a long time. So I love the artwork in these books. So the books really don't tie back into the previous comics at all. I don't think there's any callbacks to the miniseries. It basically starts as its own standalone series. Like the miniseries before it, there is no origin story. There's no Andy Tracker. We're not given any explanation where M.A.S.K and Venom came from. I think they were probably hoping that most people were familiar with the characters based on the cartoon. So, the one thing these books do have is that they did have an ongoing story. For 9 issues, the stories all do link together. There's continuity between issues. The stories do carry over. So if you really like continuity and you feel like that's one of the things that was missing in M.A.S.K, the comics do have it in spades. The cartoon really didn't have a lot of inter-episode continuity. These very much so do. They never delved into the racing series, so we do get the series 1 and 2 characters again in all these books. Basically, everybody is there kind of the way you'd think they would look, with the exception of Gloria Baker. Gloria Baker does appear in these a few times, but she has a radically different design. I'll have it up here. I don't really know where this design came from. It was not from the cartoon. Looking back at
Hold on, there's a battle we have to tend to. Be right back. We got him. Now back to the show.
Looking back at the previous miniseries, she did look like her cartoon design, so I don't really know what happened there. Yeah, it's not really a great look for her in my opinion, but at least we got Gloria in it. That's better than we can say about some other M.A.S.K media, so I'm glad Gloria is here. So the story of these, it's kind of 9 issues, and it's kind of a lot of different elements that came together that made the whole story. So the first part of the story kind of involves, the first few issues involve basically a long conspiracy where Switchblade is captured by M.A.S.K after being shot down. Matt-Trakker is forced to destroy it because there's a bomb inside. He's also forced to free Floyd Malloy, who gets captured in one issue. And this kind of makes Matt-Trakker seem like a traitor to the government and the P.N.A. So there's this whole distrust of Matt-Trakker and him having to clear his name. We do get Dwayne Kennedy back in these books and the P.N.A., but we also do get a secondary character who's Senator Garrison Colby. And he's kind of the main antagonist against the secondary antagonist against Matt-Trakker in these books. Think J. Jonah Jameson from Spider-Man, where he's technically on the good side, but he thinks M.A.S.K is a menace. He thinks Matt-Trakker is in league with Venom. He thinks that M.A.S.K is a bunch of cowboys who really shouldn't be allowed to run around as they are, so he's a character that's never appeared elsewhere as far as I know. Senator Colby is just kind of a unique character in these comics. Like I said, we get to see Dwayne Kennedy back. He's in the same role as with the P.N.A. So that's something really nice in these books, that we get to see these couple new characters appear. We also see on the Venom side, we also do get Contra World, and they're probably their most substantial form of any media. So Contra World, if you didn't watch the previous parts, I'll give a brief explanation here, is kind of the evil equivalent of the P.N.A. They kind of appear to be centered in Russia. They're really not quite clear. Some of the letters, the summaries in the letter section does appear to kind of imply they're Russian. They have the ranks like Commissar, so very much a Russian Cold War kind of vibe to them. And they're kind of a grouping of countries, it would seem, that basically want to promote terrorism, and they basically finance Venom to these ends. Contra World was never in the comic or in the cartoon, so if you're not familiar with them, if you've never read the comics, I don't blame you for not knowing who they are. They're kind of a very comic-centric organization. Because the P.N.A. did appear in the cartoon numerous times. Dwayne Kennedy appeared in the cartoon numerous times, but Contra World never did, so I don't know why. Sometimes I think that's for the best. I think Venom, was better independent, rather than having a bunch of guys holding the reins, letting Miles Mayhem kind of do what he wanted in the cartoon. I think helped a lot of the stories flow better. But it does explain where Venom gets their financing. Miles Mayhem, at some points after Switchblade was captured and destroyed, has to kind of get Contra World to finance a new Switchblade. So that does explain a little bit of how Venom gets their funding, how they get their vehicles, which I think is kind of cool. So the story, as I digress, carried on from there with Matt-Trakker basically going on the run from the government for a short time for an issue, and then having to come back and clear his name. And in one issue, Bruce Sutter leads a mission to Africa to confront Venom, who's taken over a local government. And M.A.S.K is captured, and Matt-Trakker basically single-handedly comes in and rescues all of M.A.S.K, and they capture the entire Venom team, which is the first major arc of the story. So it's a pretty impressive story arc. A lot of twists and turns to it. It's probably not something that's going to seem like the most amazing story to a modern reader if you're comparing it to some modern comics. But compared to a lot of the more simplistic episodes of the cartoon and some other stories, it is nice that we see a story that does build up over time. Um, issue 5 is where this comes to a head. And interestingly enough, for the first time in the comics, we actually do get to see the Jungle Challenge and the Venom's Revenge set. So these, if you're familiar with the toy line, you probably know that these were in the toy line, but they were never in the show. So for a U.S. audience, this was really cool that we finally got to see these items in action. So it's really kind of cool. The coloring on them, as you can see in the pictures here, are way off of what the toy is. Matt-Trakker is gray, not the green of the toy. Again, the coloring in some of these books is kind of not the best, by all admissions. So it's very cool stuff. Like I said, the story thus far is pretty interesting. Bruce Otto is actually confirmed to be this in the comic universe, the second in command of M.A.S.K. So to see Bruce Otto actually briefly leading M.A.S.K. is kind of cool. Something we really seldom saw in the cartoon. During the first season, usually Matt was always there. There's one episode where Alex takes charge in the cartoon. So in the first season, at least, the racing series, obviously Matt wasn't there all the time. So, but it's cool to see Bruce Otto as kind of taking on a little more of an active role in M.A.S.K. So very cool stuff. Very cool stuff. So Venom was for a time there completely captured. In issue 6, we actually get introduced to a secondary villain, Jakana. I kind of hope I'm saying that right. I've only seen that word written, so if you guys look at this name and think it's pronounced a very different way, then that's up to you. Jakana is how I've always thought it was pronounced, so we're going with that. So I have a picture of Jakana here. She's on the cover of issue 6, and she also appears on the cover of issue 9, so for a secondary character, that's pretty good. So who is Jakana? Jakana is a young woman. She appears to be of Asian descent and kind of wears samurai armor. She has rocket boots and blasters in her wrists, so she's really kind of a very different look to the character compared to everything else we see in M.A.S.K. Her origin story is kind of unusual in that it seems to take place over at least 15 to 20 years, and implies M.A.S.K. was around 20 years prior. A lot of it's fabricated, which I'll kind of really touch on now. So she believed that her father was captured by Matt-Trakker and M.A.S.K. He was a robotics engineer, and he had a bunch of robots that went on a rampage, and the story she was told was that M.A.S.K. stopped his robots and blamed her father for this, even though he was totally innocent in this somehow, while trying to flee the country. He was arrested, sentenced to a lengthy prison term, and he retired. Eventually was paroled, and then retired to an island where she was born. After both her parents passed away, she vowed revenge on M.A.S.K. for basically ruining her father's life. We find out this is not really true. Her father really was guilty. And we learned that he was a brilliant robotics engineer, and Jakana is 100% robot. Living robots. It was the 80s. Johnny Five is alive. We had Transformers. It's what we were doing in the 80s, apparently. Living robots. GoBots, well, they were cyborgs, but I digress. Lots of robots. So, R2-D2 and C-3PO. she's a lifelike looking human robot who thinks she's alive. So she appears, attacks M.A.S.K. M.A.S.K. captures her, and Matt-Trakker tells her the truth, and they had scanned her with X-rays and revealed to her that she's a robot. She couldn't handle this, tore her arm out, and because they had her secured with her arms handcuffed and secured. I'll have a picture here just to explain it better. And she falls off a cliff. So, like I said, we almost in the cartoon never got villains who were outside of Venom's influence. So, to kind of see it here is a very rare instance in M.A.S.K. So, it's something we almost never saw. All the other previous comics, we had Venom. Once in a while, you do get kind of a secondary villain that's helping Venom. But in this first part, Jakana had nothing to do with Venom. So that was always something really kind of cool. Venom does escape for the last few issues of the comic. And kind of go on a little bit of a rampage. Not too much to say about the last couple issues. Finally, by issue 9, we do get some interesting other developments. Jakana is revealed to be alive. Venom finds her. Convinces her that, she's Matt-Trakker's the one who did her wrong, and she goes after M.A.S.K again. And she ends up dying at the end of the comic, as much as you can kill a robot. Again, the 80s, robots could be alive. I'm not gonna touch the science of this. That's way above my pay grade. So, Jakana actually learns the truth that M.A.S.K isn't really evil, and she dies redeeming herself. So, a couple other interesting things that we do get towards the end of the comic here is Matt-Trakker actually goes on a date with a woman named Audrey Isles. So, Matt-Trakker, throughout the run of this comic, there's a small running subplot that he feels like he's neglecting Scott. And we've all seen the cartoon. We all know, yeah, Matt sometimes can be not the best of fathers. So, he really wants Scott to have a mother figure. So, that was kind of an interesting thing. He actually goes on a date, wanting to date a woman, basically, so he could find a mother figure for Scott, which is kind of a different turn of events, and I think it's kind of interesting that we got to kind of see that. So, and if you're wondering how this turned out, the book was canceled before we ever do find out really anything about her. In fact, this happened in the very last issue. So, the book wraps up with Venom basically getting away, and the book doesn't really end on a cliffhanger per se. Jakana dies in the last issue, Venom gets away, and it kind of just ends there. There's no word on why the comics were canceled. I'm going to assume it was probably sales at this point. By 87, the racing series was going on, and maybe sales were not as good. Kind of M.A.S.K had been around for a couple years. And again, as a kid, I didn't have these. I've never really met any collectors who said, like, these were really their jam. Most people who look at the M.A.S.K mythos usually talk about the cartoon. The cartoon seems to be really what people were into, people remember. In other fandoms like G.I. Joe and Transformers, the comics generally do have quite a big fan base. A lot of times these comics were, and those other fandoms were more mature. Like in G.I. Joe, not everybody, in the G.I. Joe comic, not everybody had a parachute. Cobra soldiers died. In later runs, actually, some of the G.I. Joe characters, the named characters, do die. The Transformer comics were much more brutal than anything that we saw in the cartoon. So, And those went on for a very long time. They went on for a lot of issues. M.A.S.K, we had a 4-part miniseries, and then these 9 issues, not counting the preview comics. So, very minuscule to compare to, say, G.I. Joe's 155 main issue run. Transformers, I believe, had 80 issues. And that's not counting their side series. So, the M.A.S.K comic I just don't think was very successful. Which is kind of a shame that we didn't get more of these stories. And we never got to see really a proper conclusion. I think it would have been cool to have another take on the racing series. And maybe even the split second series. To kind of give us another take on these. Because we might not have liked what they did with the comics. Or the cartoon version of these. But the comics may have taken a different direction. So, in the US, it's kind of a shame this never really happened. Or really took off. So looking at these books, like I said, I mean, as a whole, there are some other things there's some other minor characters that do appear. Scott and T-Bob actually have a lady who takes care of them, named Mrs. Newberry, who's a recurring character. Vanessa Warfield still appears in these books, despite her not having a toy. Well, I guess she would have had a toy at this point, but nice to see that she was here and wasn't completely left out, so very nice. Okay, so looking at the characters, so looking at the books as a whole, finally, what else can I say about this review's gone on a little bit. Looking at the price of these books in the market today, if you want to collect them, there's 9 issues of this series. I've generally got a couple issues here. This is one I actually picked up in my local comic book store, maybe a couple years ago. I paid $2.50 for it. I basically was kind of upgrading a few of them because some of mine were getting kind of old. I mean, I had them since the 90s, so I paid about $2 a piece, $2.50, less than $3 a piece for all these books at my local comic book store. They're not particularly rare. They do come up. They're not particularly super sought after, so if you're patient with these, you can probably get a run for between $20 and $30 without too much trouble, if you're patient. I really wouldn't push to get, like, these comics, like, to say that they're really pricey. There's really not a whole lot of value to them, other than if you want to read them and enjoy them. And then there's a great value there. So I really do like these comics. This series I would actually recommend, just because it's pretty available in the US. The prices on them aren't super expensive. And it's generally a fun read. I mean, how they fit in continuity, they really don't fit anywhere in particular that I can see. You could probably say they're in the same continuity as the previous miniseries easily. Venom and M.A.S.K are both well aware of each other's identities, so it doesn't really fit within the cartoon. I guess you could probably shoehorn it between the original series and the racing series if you were so inclined. But for the most part, this was it for the M.A.S.K comics in the US. So after 1987, we never got anything else. We never got anything with the racing series or split seconds, which, again, I feel is like a real shame. Because sometimes I think a good story will sell a toy that might not be so great. So I do wonder if, like, maybe some of the split seconds would have benefited from having some fiction. Maybe having a different take on the racing series would have really helped in the US on sales. I don't think it would have saved the toy line. I don't think it would have changed history really dramatically, but it would have been really cool to see. So, so that basically wraps up all we've got to talk about in the US comics. But if you think we're done talking about comics, we're going to travel next time across the pond to the UK. Because whereas M.A.S.K only had a handful of comics here, the UK is a completely different story. So I'm going to look forward to kind of going through those. We're probably going to talk about the UK comics in a lot of multiple parts because there's just so much of it that one video for all the UK comics will not cut it. So we're going to finish. This basically finishes up the US series. In the future, I might go into some of these issues a little bit deeper and fully review the stories, but these are kind of an overview just to kind of give you an idea. If you've never seen these comics before, you may have just seen like a couple like the covers before, what you're getting into. So again, these have beautiful artwork. Stories are pretty good. It's an interesting take on M.A.S.K. It's just something a little bit different. So anyways, so let me know if you've read these comics, if you're from the US, if you're into these. If you're from the UK, did you look at these later on? So, anyways, this has been David from the Boulder Hill Archive. I'm going to be signing off now. Just remember to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate all your support here. So, thanks for watching. Everybody take care. Stay safe out there.
It's gonna live the nation. It's Spectrum's